Longtime readers will know that I am a committed atheist. However, I believe that most atheists are not actual atheists because they do not take their own beliefs to their logical ends. In other words, they are hypocrites. In this essay, I will outline what I believe to be dishonest atheism, who the main figures are, the binary and inescapable choice that every person must make, and finally, the serious political implications of both honest and dishonest atheism. So, we will begin by separating everybody into 4 different categories, depending on their level of belief. On the side of devotion, we have the true believers, who take their faith seriously and are not willing to ignore the ethical implications of their faith. On the other side of the spectrum, we have what I will call honest atheism. Of course, this self-flattering title indicates that I see myself in this category. Then there are 2 categories in between these 2 poles of belief. On the side of the believers, we have the unserious believers, who nominally believe in their religion, but refuse to take the moral and metaphysical aspect of their religion seriously. Here we can find our spiritual but not religious types, the people who are into some sort of vague mysticism, but the great majority of people in this category are the people who are born into a religion and just see it as a fact of life and do not take the implications of their faith to their logical extent. And finally, the last category and the main focus of this essay will be the dishonest atheists, who are nominally atheistic, but still hold on to metaphysical beliefs in one way or another. This essay might be interesting for everyone, but if you are in this category, this essay is specifically for you, and hopefully it will lead to some reflection. One final note before I begin. I chose the name Dishonest Atheism because it is catchy. I do not intend to say that all the people in this category are bad or stupid or whatever, but simply that they have not taken their beliefs to their logical ends. So, what is atheism? What does being an atheist actually mean? Just based on the name, it means that you believe that there is no God. And it goes actually much further than this. Atheism is the negation of all metaphysical claims and beliefs. In my opinion, you can't be an atheist if you believe in ghosts, vibes, or anything else that is not material. Both atheism and materialism are inextricably linked, and so an atheist can only believe in things that are material and therefore tangible. I put so much emphasis into this because one cannot reconcile atheism with any metaphysical beliefs. If an atheist were to hold a single metaphysical belief, he would have to choose between his atheism and his belief. For as Kaczynski said, you can't eat your cake and have it too. The most important logical consequence of believing only in the existence of matter and nothing else is that this belief will inevitably drag you into ethical nihilism. Allow me to explain. Ethics are the set of beliefs that rule what is correct and what is incorrect at a societal level. All ethical systems base themselves on some sort of standard or authority that allows them to make clear distinctions between right and wrong. Generally, when there are ethical arguments between 2 groups of people, it is because they appeal to different ethical authorities. Throughout history, these disagreements have normally taken the form of religious differences. The Muslims logically disagree with the Christians because they have different moral authorities. In this case, they have different holy books. However, in the case of atheism, we have a real dilemma, because the whole point of an ethical system that stands above the individual is to guide this individual in the right direction. As a result, we can see that almost all ethical systems have some sort of metaphysical authority. Sometimes it is directly a god, sometimes it is a principle or an unquestionable value. The point is that what decides what is ethically right and wrong is always something that is above humans. The issue is that when a society throws away all metaphysical concepts and becomes completely atheistic, the only thing that will be left as a moral authority will be other human beings. If you're an atheist, you must believe that all laws, philosophies, and ideas of right and wrong have been created by humans without any divine guidance. And here comes the great difficulty. When there are no supernatural authorities, all ethical authority comes from the opinion of another person. Without metaphysics, all moral claims are based on individual opinion and preference. The issue is that there is no good reason why I should prefer to follow the opinion of other people, especially when I have my own. Indeed, practically everyone would rather follow his own conscience than that of another. This means that for an atheist, there is no objective and universal morality, but instead many subjective and local ones. This truly creates moral chaos. To be more precise, the concept is called ethical nihilism. It is the belief that there is no objective right or wrong. Well, many might say that this is just postmodernism, but I would rather avoid the label because I believe that their moral relativism is a function of their atheism, and that people like Foucault still held some metaphysical values. More on that later. I believe that every honest atheist must come to the conclusion of ethical nihilism. However, it is also clear that this is not a desirable state to be in. One cannot have a working society without a common ethical framework. If everybody does what they want to do, then the result will be anarchy. Besides, nihilism is also very personally unpleasant. Nobody likes to be confronted by existential doubt. There are two ways of dealing with ethical nihilism, which respectively separate the honest from the dishonest atheists. Honest atheism accepts nihilism and builds a new ethical framework based on subjective and materialist principles, while dishonest atheism decides to keep its metaphysical values in order to escape nihilism. There are two principal ways that dishonest atheism attempts to keep its metaphysical values. The first is through the idea that universal ethical values can be achieved through reason alone, which is embodied by liberals and humanists such as Dawkins. The second is by keeping certain ethical dogmas untouched despite nominally not believing in anything that can justify them, which is the case with the socialists and the communists. We will first cover the attempt to escape the logical conclusion of nihilism, which is best represented in the person of Richard Dawkins. And indeed, he was the catalyst for the creation of this essay. I will be referring to these people as rationalists, by the way. The core idea is that we can still have objective and universal ethics without the need of any metaphysics, because ethics can be derived from reason alone. This idea has its roots in the Enlightenment and is particularly present in the writings of Kant. Indeed, instead of explaining it, I will just quote Richard Dawkins talking about it some years ago.
I think I want a morality that is thought out, reasoned, argued, discussed, and based upon, I could almost say, intelligent design. Can we not design our society which has the sort of morality, the sort of society that we want to live in? If you actually look at the moralities that are accepted among modern people, among 21st century people, we don't believe in slavery anymore. We believe in equality of women. We believe in being gentle. We believe in being kind to animals. These are all things which are entirely recent. They have very little basis in biblical or Quranic scripture. They are things that have developed over historical time through a consensus of reasoning, sober discussion, argument, legal theory, political and moral philosophy. These do not come from religion.
In many ways, this idea of rationality is very optimistic because it offers a universal ethical framework. Even better, it argues that history moves towards what is rational and what is good. That, of course, this will culminate in a society that is completely rational and completely moral. Indeed, this was the optimistic sentiment that believed in technological and ethical progress, which was very popular in the 19th century. Even I must accept that it is much, much nicer than ethical nihilism and moral subjectivism. The superhuman authority that they appeal to is reason. The idea is that through the proper use of individual reason, one can gain enough insight to be able to determine what is universally right and wrong. Before we go forward, we must first actually define what reason and being rational actually means. In my opinion, reason is nothing more than the ability to efficiently solve problems. 2 plus 2 is a rational statement because it will lead to efficient problem solving. 2 plus 2 equals 5 is irrational because it will not. If you try to design an airplane based on a mathematical model where 2 plus 2 equals 5, you will kill the test pilot. Rationality is just good problem solving, and irrationality is its opposite. So, what is the problem that Professor Dawkins is trying to solve? It is the problem of making an ethical system, a set of rules that will create a desirable society where people want to live. The idea is that we can use our problem-solving rationality to create an ethical system that will lead to a desirable society. Sounds easy enough. The issue comes when we actually try to figure out what makes a society desirable, because this is ultimately subjective and every person will have a different conception of a perfect society. A hippie's perfect society will look radically different to the idea that a stockbroker might have, and this one in turn would also be very different to the vision of an army sergeant. And these examples are just different individuals inside the same generic society. But the differences are even bigger when we look at different cultures. The perfect society for a British academic will be radically different from the one that an Amazon tribesman would come to desire. Once we have a clear idea of what a perfect society looks like, it is fairly easy to use your reason to make the ethical framework that will lead to this beautiful society. But the real problem is using one's reason to determine what a desirable society looks like. The issue is that desirability is a function of desire, and therefore is not rational at all. This is best exemplified by this Schopenhauer quote. Der Mensch kann zwar tun, was will, aber kann nicht wollen, was will. A man can do what he desires, but cannot want what he desires. Our desires, and by extension the values that we hold, are the results of our temperament and our culture. We can do little to change them once they are formed. It is very difficult to change one's cultural values, but it is absolutely impossible to change one's natural preferences. One person wants one type of society, and another wants another type. How can we rationally determine who is correct? You might as well use your reason to figure out what is the best flavor of Skittles according to science. You cannot use your reason to give the correct answer in something that is a matter of individual desire, of individual taste. However, this is exactly what these rationalists do. They say that there are universal moral values that can lead to a desirable society. Coincidentally, this desirable society holds the exact same values that all the main rationalists, such as Dawkins, Harris, Boghossian, Pinker, etc., also hold, which are the ethical beliefs of academia in the 1990s. So, there are only two possible explanations for this. Either all of these academics arrived independently at the same fundamental ethical truth using their reason, or they were all influenced by the same culture and therefore agree with each other. To solve this, let's use Dawkins' own argument against universal religion against his universal ethical system. If he were as smart and rational as he is today, but instead of being born in Britain, he were born in North Sentinel Island, would he come to the same ethical conclusions? How about Iran? How about Britain 100 years ago? So, I really cannot say that I was particularly surprised when Dawkins labeled himself a cultural Christian when faced with the possibility of a Muslim-majority Britain. Actually, I think that cultural Christianity is just another way to say British culture, because the liberal values of modern Britain have their origins in Protestantism. John Locke was certainly not an atheist. I certainly do not have a problem with Dawkins, a British man, holding British values. What I do have a problem with is when these rationalist professors take the accepted humanist and liberal values of Western intelligentsia and then declare that they are universal, objective, and the product of pure reason. I believe that they are using their reason not to deduce what is morally good and true, but instead to rationalize the values that they already held. That is why I would categorize their whole intellectual project as fundamentally dishonest. A true atheist does not have the luxury to declare his preferred values to be universal because of reason or whatever. On the other hand, I think that a great counterexample to Dawkins is Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad, who, being an atheist, is faced with the exact same problem. However, he actually has the will to take his own opinions to their logical conclusions. Carl is deeply attached to the values of English tradition, but he does not try to claim that these values are the product of reason, but instead he states that they are the product of his cultural upbringing. He realizes that for an atheist there is no higher authority to appeal to, and therefore he does not try to create an objective system of ethics that claims to be correct everywhere at all times. Instead, he argues that he has his own subjective moral values. But I think that it would be better to quote his own words. This is from a discussion that he had with Peter Boghossian, which I would definitely recommend because I think it illustrates this whole issue quite nicely.
Well, I realize that this does situate us firmly within the postmodern framework, though, right?
Right. It situates you.
Yes, it does. Yeah, no. Hey, I'm willing to admit it, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate that it's not necessarily a nice place that a lot of people want to go, but I do think that actually they kind of have the classically liberal position on this beaten. I can't find a position from which I can say there is a value here that isn't simply contingent on my preference for it. And so the alternative is say, okay, well, that is true. Well, okay, what follows from that? And really, it's about the standards we set for ourselves and what we feel to be right. And actually, if you think about it, isn't that just generally what you do anyway? You know, isn't that just generally how you live your life anyway? And so really, there is a kind of refreshing honesty about it.
Carl calls himself a postmodern traditionalist exactly because he embraces both moral subjectivism and his own cultural tradition and its values, without trying to universalize what is inherently local. That is the way that he overcomes ethical nihilism, and overall I think that he is a great example of what atheism should look like. Socialism is a deeply moralistic movement that has ethical concepts like justice and equality at its core. But at the same time, it is a deeply atheistic and anti-clerical movement, with only a couple of wacky exceptions such as Christian socialism. This creates an inner conflict between the atheism that translates into the lack of an ethical authority to make absolute moral claims, and the absolute moral claims of the movement, such as their complete support of equality, being against any type of oppression, etc., etc. So let's do a thought experiment. Imagine that we go up to a progressive or communist or whatever, and we ask him, why is equality good? He will probably think about it for a bit, and then he will probably reach for the utilitarian argument. Equality is good because that way there will be more people that will be happy, and there will be no inequality, and therefore everybody will have enough. The issue with this argument is that utilitarianism and its arguments do rely on some a priori moral values. It presupposes that pleasure is a good in itself, hedonism, and that this should be given to the largest number of people, equality. But these presuppositions are unsupported. And if our atheism is to be honest, we cannot leave any dangling metaphysical values. So, can we objectively prove or disprove hedonism? Or why should we prefer to maximize pleasure for the largest number of people? Why should we not prioritize our family or just ourselves? These ethical arguments attempt to justify metaphysical values by appealing to other metaphysical values. It truly feels like putting out fire by throwing wood on it. Every argument that you try to prop up with an ethical value must also be propped up with another until you arrive at an argument that relies only on a person's subjective experience, like hedonism. Any person can try to disprove hedonism, but in the end, the only possible argument for or against is individual experience. This is essentially true of any argument that our hypothetical communists can come up with. They are all vulnerable to ethical nihilism because they rely on other moral presuppositions that are themselves far from objective. Let's try this with some other expected arguments and see if they pass the postmodern acid test. Human rights. Equality is good because the Declaration of Human Rights stated that humans have fundamental rights, dignity, and value. This sounds very nice and all, but despite the fanfare and the civics and ethics classes, the Declaration of Human Rights is still just a piece of paper. And where do these rights come from? The paper? The ink? The last claim is, I think, the most interesting of all. Humans have fundamental dignity and value. This concept is much older than socialism or the UN. It is fundamentally a Christian concept that comes from the idea that all humans are made in God's image and that everyone has a soul. But if you're an atheist, that simply won't do. That is exactly what bothers me so much about our dear progressives. They want to eat their cake and have it too. They want to believe that there is a fundamental and unchangeable value and human dignity that all humans have, but they also don't want to believe in God or the soul. I truly believe that it is as easy as this Boolean choice, one or the other. If you believe that all humans are fundamentally God's children, then humans are not animals. Instead, we are something special. In theological terms, we call this the Sonderstellung, or the special position in German. But if you're an atheist, there cannot be any Sonderstellung. You must believe that we are nothing other than smarter, generally less hairy versions of chimpanzees. In such a case, there is no uniform value to all human beings because we're only animals. By questioning their a priori values, you can also tear up all the other arguments that they will bring up. From Kant's sweet idea that humans are not means but always ends in themselves, all the ways to John Rawls' idiotic little thought experiment that apparently is meant to define universal justice or something. But I will not go over every single unjustified metaphysical value that the leftists embraced, despite, because that would be a pretty long list, let's be honest here. But when you read Marx, you will realize that the question of the morality of oppression or inequality is not even mentioned. Marx and all the other socialists that I have read hold these values, such as equality, to be a priori good. And this is a given, something that is so fundamental and so obvious that there is absolutely no reason to discuss it. I believe that leftists hold these values, such as equality, fairness, human rights, etc., as goods in themselves, and therefore one can only describe them as metaphysical dogmas that are not reconcilable with atheism. But then I think that one must also take into account that despite all the critique that one might direct at these two strands of dishonest atheism, they still remain extremely popular ideologies that will or have been dominating the majority of political discourse. If these two movements have such inherent contradictions between their dogmatic moralism and their atheism, why do they have so many devoted followers? What is the thing that makes these movements so attractive despite their contradictions? Well, I believe that the only way to answer this is to look at what makes all religions so fundamentally appealing. Religion is appealing because it provides explanations that give some sense to our lives and to the world around us. These explanations can be classified into two. First come the physical explanations, which attempt to explain the physical world around us. Why do things fall down? Why does it rain? Why are there seasons? Where do humans and animals come from? Etc. Then, second, we have the metaphysical explanations that try to explain the things that are present in our lives, but are not merely physical and cannot be explained in physical terms, such as how should we live our lives? Where do our emotions and passions come from? And most importantly for this essay, how can we tell good from evil, right from wrong? Whichever ideology or religion can persuasively answer these fundamental questions will be very attractive. But when we look at the state of most religions in the world, we see a very bleak picture. Most countries are heading towards a religiously unaffiliated majority for the first time in history. I believe that this is because natural science has come to provide better physical explanations than the established religions. When we look at the Black Death, we can now understand that it was the result of bacteria, and therefore explanations for it being divine punishment start falling a bit short. As a result, religion has lost half of the market when it comes to explaining the world, and one cannot simply believe in half a religion. I believe that this is the main reason for the state of religious crises that we can observe. The issue is that natural science cannot provide any real explanations when it comes to our fundamental metaphysical questions. This means that there is a great desire for an ideology or a religion that is capable of giving persuasive answers to our metaphysical questions, and especially to our ethical questions, without clashing with natural science. Here is where Marx and Dawkins come in. They each offer an ideology that provides a complex ethical framework and also embraces materialism as not to clash with natural science. Their versions of atheism are really a way to have religion's ethics without actually having any theological baggage. This is an advantage that makes these ideologies far more adaptive and attractive to modern people who are looking for ethical guidance and are stuck between total atheism and true belief. Atheism implies ethical nihilism, and belief requires absolute faith. None of these two are remotely approachable. Therefore, the path of least resistance is to accept neither, to have both scientific materialism and complete ethical certainty, but only at the price of being a hypocrite. Now, if you agree with my argument, then there are inherent contradictions in Dawkins' liberalism and in the successor ideologies of Marxism. But what should we do with this information? When it comes to argumentation, a contradiction is a weakness, a flaw to be exploited, if we were inclined to do so, of course. I can only speak for myself, but I certainly dislike these two movements and believe that this contradiction should be exploited. The ethical nihilist critique is deadly when the victim has no way to defend it against it, and this, I think, is certainly the case. The true believers are pretty much invulnerable to nihilist arguments because their faith gives them a solid base to anchor their moral beliefs. However, the people in the middle, the unserious believers and the dishonest atheists, have no ground to stand on. The survival of their beliefs and arguments depends on their values remaining as vague as possible. When you corner a rationalist or a leftist or whatever they call themselves, and you press them to justify their morality within the frame of materialism, they will simply be unable to do so, and will either entrench themselves in a metaphysical value that they will not be willing to let go, or they will budge and give way to subjectivism. This is a deadly argument against my political enemies while also being harmless to my friends, which is the reason why I will recommend its use. Either or. Every person must choose in their hearts either to believe and take the implications of the existence of God seriously, or to be an honest atheist and to deal with the ensuing ethical nihilism in their own peculiar way. Despite being an atheist, I have a very soft spot in my heart for Kierkegaard, because he was a true believer. He stated that one must either believe in God with all of one's heart or not to believe at all. There is no middle ground. Of course, there is a third option of wanting to have it both ways, but this will lead one to go into endless argumentative circles around loaded terms such as equality, freedom, or justice. However, this will not lead to anything because, without metaphysics, the ultimate moral authority will always come down to man. The only way to get out of dishonest atheism is to cut the Gordian knot of endless circular arguments and to throw out every single moral dogma that you cannot justify. Once the slate is clean, you can build something solid that will be able to overcome ethical nihilism, or at least help you find your way in our chaotic world. Thank you for your time.